There was a time when the fabric of Australian life was woven together by people doing jobs that nobody really noticed until they were gone. The bloke who delivered your milk at dawn, the woman who connected your phone calls, the man who sharpened your knives at the door. These weren't glamorous careers, but they were the heartbeat of communities, the invisible threads that kept neighbourhoods running and people connected. Today, we're looking at 8 jobs that held Australia together until they disappeared. Jobs that shaped daily life and left a hole when they vanished. Let's remember the people who kept Australia running. Number 1, the swagman. And here's the job that, more than any other, represents a lost Australia, the swagman. Not quite a job, not quite a lifestyle, but something in between. Swagmen were itinerant workers who walked from station to station, town to town, carrying their belongings in a swag rolled across their shoulders. They'd work for a few days or weeks shearing, fencing, general labour, then move on. They slept rough, cooked over campfires, and lived on the road. It sounds romantic now, but it was a hard life, born out of necessity during the Depression and the decades before. Swagmen were part of the rural landscape, familiar figures walking the dusty roads, stopping at stations to ask for work or a meal. Station owners and farmers relied on them during busy seasons, and there was an unwritten code of hospitality. You fed a swagman, gave him work if you had it, and let him camp on your land. By the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, the swagman was disappearing. Better roads, cars, and more stable employment meant fewer men took to the track. The image of the swaggy with his billy and his blanket became folklore, immortalized in Waltzing Matilda, but the reality faded away. Those blokes represented resilience, independence, and a kind of freedom that came at a steep cost. When the last of the swagmen hung up their swags, an era ended. An era where work was wherever you could find it, and home was wherever you stopped for the night. Number 2, the telegram messenger on horseback in the Outback. In remote parts of Australia, telegrams didn't arrive by bicycle, they arrived on horseback. Station to station, town to town, across distances that would take days to cover, telegram messengers carried news through the Outback. They were tough, resourceful blokes who knew the land, knew how to survive in the bush, and understood that the messages they carried could change lives. A telegram might announce a wedding, a death, the arrival of supplies, or urgent business that couldn't wait for the mail. The messenger would ride in all weather, through heat and dust, stopping at homesteads to deliver the yellow envelope, and sometimes staying for a meal before riding on. It was lonely work, dangerous work, but it connected the isolated heart of Australia to the rest of the world. As radio communication improved and roads reached further into the Outback, the mounted messenger became obsolete. But for decades, those riders were the only link many remote families had to urgent news. They were part of the landscape, part of the story of survival and connection in the Australian bush. Number 3, the rag and bone man. Rago, bono. The call would echo through the streets, and kids would come running. The rag and bone man drove a horse and cart through the suburbs, collecting anything people didn't want anymore. Old clothes, scrap metal, bottles, bones from the butcher, broken furniture. He'd trade small toys or lollies for what you brought him, and kids loved it. It was recycling before recycling had a name, a way of making sure nothing went to waste. The rag and bone man would sort through everything he collected, selling it on to factories, tanners, or scrap dealers. Rags became paper, bones became glue or fertilizer, metal was melted down and reused. It was hard, unglamorous work, and the blokes who did it were often looked down on. But they performed a vital service, keeping waste out of the streets and making sure materials got a second life. Did you ever trade old rags or bottles with the rag and bone man for a toy or a few lollies? As suburbs modernized and council rubbish collection became standard, the rag and bone man disappeared. The horse and cart was replaced by trucks, and the personal connection was lost. That distinctive call and the excitement of trading your junk for a small treasure became a memory. Number 4. The ice delivery man. Before electric refrigerators were common, keeping food cold meant buying blocks of ice. And the iceman delivered them, driving his truck through the suburbs in the early morning, hauling huge blocks wrapped in hessian into people's homes. He'd carry them on his shoulder with iron tongs, dripping water down the path, and slide them into the icebox in your kitchen. It was heavy, hard work, and in summer it was a race against the heat. The iceman knew every customer's schedule, knew how much ice each household needed, and sometimes he'd chip off small pieces for kids who'd gather around his truck on hot days. The ice itself was cut from massive blocks stored in ice houses, kept frozen with sawdust insulation. It was a whole industry built around keeping things cold before electricity made it automatic. When fridges became affordable in the 950 seconds and 60 seconds, the iceman's route got shorter and shorter until one day he just stopped coming. The ice houses closed, the trucks were sold off, and a job that had existed for generations simply vanished. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when keeping your food fresh depended on a man delivering frozen water to your door. Number 5. The lamplighter. Before electric street lighting was everywhere, Australian streets were lit by gas lamps, and every evening, just before dusk, the lamplighter would walk his route with a long pole, reaching up to turn on each lamp one by one. It was a solitary job, walking the same streets at the same time every day, but it was essential. Those lamps meant safety, meant you could see where you were going after dark, meant the streets didn't belong entirely to the shadows. Kids would sometimes follow the lamplighter, watching the lamps flicker to life, treating it like a kind of magic show. And in the morning, he'd walk the route again, turning them all off. The job disappeared as electricity spread and automatic timers took over, but there was something reassuring about seeing the lamplighter on his rounds, knowing that someone was looking after the light. It was a job that belonged to the rhythm of the day, marking the transition from afternoon to evening, from light to dark. When the lamplighters stopped walking the streets, nobody really noticed at first. But the ritual was gone, and with it, a small piece of the daily pattern that made neighbourhoods feel watched over. Number 6. The door-to-door knife sharpener. Once a month, sometimes more, you'd hear a distinctive call echoing down the street. Knives sharpened, scissors sharpened. The knife sharpener would walk from house to house, pushing his cart with the grinding wheel attached, stopping wherever someone flagged him down. He'd sit on your front step or in the driveway, pedaling the wheel with his foot while sparks flew and the blades sang against the stone. In a few minutes, your kitchen knives would go from dull to razor sharp, your scissors cutting clean again. It cost a few shillings, and it was worth every penny. These blokes knew their craft, knew the angle of every blade, and took pride in the work. Housewives relied on them because a sharp knife made all the difference in the kitchen, and buying new ones wasn't an option when the old ones could be fixed. The knife sharpener was part tradesman, part wanderer, moving through suburbs with his cart and his skill. By the 980 seconds, cheap knives and throwaway culture made the job obsolete. But for generations, that call down the street meant your tools would work properly again, and that was worth something. Number 7. The telephone exchange operator. Pick up the phone in the 950 seconds or 60 seconds, and you didn't just dial a number, you spoke to an operator. A woman, almost always, sitting in front of a massive switchboard, plugging cables into sockets to connect your call. "Number, please," she'd say, and you'd tell her who you wanted to reach. She'd connect you manually, sometimes listening in to make sure the line was clear, sometimes remembering that Mrs. Jones down the street was at her daughter's place this week. Operators knew everyone's business, not because they were nosy, but because they were the connectors, the human network that made communication possible. It required concentration, speed, and a good memory for voices and numbers. The work was exhausting, hours sitting at the board, hands moving constantly, calls coming in endlessly. But it was also vital. Do you remember having to ask the operator to connect your calls, or hearing that familiar voice say, "Number, please"? When automatic dialing arrived, thousands of women lost their jobs, and something personal was lost too. The voice that knew your street, that could connect you in an emergency, that made the phone system feel human, that disappeared. Today, we tap screens and connect instantly. But we'll never hear "number please" again. Number 8. The telegram delivery boy. Before phones were in every home, urgent news travelled by telegram. And the person who brought that news, racing through the streets on a bicycle with a leather satchel bouncing at his side, was the telegram delivery boy. He'd arrive at your door, hand you the small yellow envelope, and wait while you read it, because sometimes there was a reply to take back. Telegrams meant something important: a birth, a death, a ship arriving, an emergency. The sight of that boy pedaling up your street could make your heart race with anticipation or dread. He knew the streets better than anyone, knew which houses to approach carefully because the news might be bad, and which families always tipped. It was a job that required speed, discretion, and a kind of emotional intelligence that nobody talked about. By the 1970 seconds, as phones became universal, the telegram boy disappeared from Australian streets. But for decades, he was the messenger who connected families across vast distances, carrying news that couldn't wait. So there you have it, 8 jobs that held Australia together until they disappeared. They weren't glamorous, they weren't easy, and the people who did them rarely got recognition, but they were essential. They kept communities connected, kept goods moving, kept the country functioning in ways we barely remember now. Progress replaced them with machines, automation, and new systems. We gained efficiency and convenience, but we lost something too: the human touch, the personal connection, the knowledge that there was a person behind every service. These jobs are gone, and they're never coming back. But the people who did them helped build the Australia we know today. Which of these jobs do you remember most clearly? And did your family rely on any of these workers? This was Retro Australia, where the past is still alive.